Have you ever had a moment so perfect, so brimming with the promise of everything you've ever wanted, that a cold dread whispers in the back of your mind that it simply cannot last? I've had two of those moments, and they happened on the very same day. The first unfolded under the sterile fluorescent lights of a doctor's office, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken hope. Dan's hand was warm and firm in mine, a silent anchor in a sea of medical jargon and glossy pamphlets showing smiling, impossibly happy families. "Everything looks excellent, Maya," Dr. Evans said, her smile practiced but kind. She turned the monitor toward us, pointing at a constellation of tiny, dark circles. "Your hormone levels are optimal, and the follicle count is very encouraging. There is absolutely no reason to think this next cycle won't be the one." Her words were a balm, a cool hand on the feverish anxiety I'd carried for months. Every month, a tiny death, a quiet mourning for a life that hadn't even begun. But now there was a map, a strategy, a reason for hope. Dan squeezed my hand, his knuckles white. I saw the reflection of the screen in his eyes, and for a second, I didn't see a 34-year-old software architect. I saw the father of my child, his face etched with a fierce, protective love. "Did you hear that, May? Optimal." He savored the word as if it were a fine wine. I could only nod, a lump forming in my throat. It was dangerous to want something this much. It felt like daring the universe to take it away. What if I told you that the universe was already listening, taking notes for a tragedy? The second perfect moment arrived that evening, bathed in the golden glow of twilight and smelling of freshly cut grass and barbecue. We were in my parents' backyard, a sprawling green expanse that held the ghosts of 1,000 childhood memories. But tonight wasn't about the past. It was about the future. My sister Chloe's future. She stood in the center of it all, a beacon in a simple white dress, her law school diploma framed and resting on a gift table nearby. At 26, she was incandescent, radiating an energy that promised to conquer the world. My mother fussed over her, straightening an imaginary wrinkle on her dress. "Our little lawyer," she cooed, her voice thick with pride. My dad stood beside them, a broad grin splitting his face, telling anyone who would listen about the prestigious firm in the city that had snatched her up before the ink on her diploma was even dry. They were a perfect portrait of family pride, a scene of untarnished joy. I watched them, the doctor's optimistic words still echoing in my ears, and felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated happiness. I felt Dan's arm slide around my waist, pulling me close. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "Look at her. She's on top of the world." I nodded, my heart swelling with so much love for my brilliant, vibrant little sister it physically hurt. She caught my eye from across the lawn, and her face broke into a radiant smile, a smile that said, "Can you believe it? Two futures, shining so brightly on a perfect summer evening. Hers was a skyscraper of career ambition, mine a quiet, deeply yearned-for nursery. They felt so close, so real." Chloe broke away from our parents and navigated the sea of well-wishers, making a beeline for me. She threw her arms around my neck, her hug fierce and full of life. "You came. I was worried you'd be too tired after your appointment." She pulled back, her dark eyes searching mine. Chloe always saw too much. "How did it go? Was it okay?" I gave her a watery smile, the hope from that morning bubbling up again, too powerful to contain. "It was more than okay, Chloe. It was good news." Her face lit up with genuine delight, a reflection of my own. "Oh, May, that's amazing." For a moment, it wasn't my 26-year-old sister, the legal prodigy, standing before me, but the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare, the one I'd sworn to always protect. We stood there, Two sisters on the precipice of our dreams. Do you know why 95% of people never reach their goals? Sometimes it's not because they fail, but because life presents them with a choice where every single path leads to a broken heart. We talked for a while, our conversation a comfortable shorthand built over 2 decades. She spoke of contracts and case law, of the corner office she was determined to earn within 5 years. I spoke of ovulation cycles and basal body temperatures, the strange new language that had taken over my life. Our paths were so different, yet they were both about creating a legacy, about building a life. It never occurred to me, not even for a second, that those two paths were about to collide in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Later, as the party wound down and the fireflies began to dot the twilight, I found myself sitting with Dan on the old porch swing. Chloe was laughing with our cousins by the bonfire, her silhouette dancing against the flames. "It's a good day," Dan said softly, his voice full of contentment. He rested his hand on my stomach, a gesture of pure faith. Two bright futures in the family. I leaned my head on his shoulder, closing my eyes and trying to memorize the feeling of this perfect moment. If you knew it was the last perfect moment, would you do anything differently? I wouldn't have. I would have clung to it, blissfully, tragically unaware of the darkness waiting just beyond the edges of the firelight. 3 weeks. Do you know what can happen in 3 weeks? A seed can sprout, a habit can form, or an entire world can begin to unravel at the seams, thread by silent thread. After Chloe's party, life had settled into a rhythm of determined hope. I was a cartographer of my own body, mapping out temperatures and timing, my thoughts consumed by the life I was trying to will into existence. I was so focused on the future, I didn't notice the present was tilting off its axis. The first call was easy to dismiss. Chloe's voice on the other end of the line was thin, frayed at the edges. "I'm just so tired, May. I think this new firm is literally trying to kill me with paperwork." I laughed, offering the practiced encouragement of an older sister. "You've got this, Chloe. You thrive on this stuff." But a small, cold knot formed in my stomach. Thriving didn't sound like that. Thriving didn't sound like a voice trying to keep its head above water. Then came the bruises. My mom mentioned them in a phone call, her voice tight with a forced casualness that set off every alarm bell in my head. "She has these awful marks on her legs. She says she keeps bumping into her desk, but honestly, Maya, they're everywhere." I pictured Chloe, graceful and precise, suddenly becoming clumsy. It didn't fit. What do you do when the most capable person you know starts offering explanations that make no sense? You pretend to believe them, because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was in my classroom, grading papers on the life cycle of a butterfly, when my phone buzzed with a call from my dad. He never called me during the school day. "Maya," he said, and his voice was raw, stripped of its usual booming confidence. "You need to get to the hospital. It's Chloe. She collapsed at work." The children's drawings of caterpillars and chrysalises on the wall seemed to mock me. Transformation and new life. My own sister's life was in free fall, and I was miles away, surrounded by construction paper. The emergency room was a special kind of hell, a place where time stretched and warped. Dan was there, having left work the moment I called him. He held my hand while my parents paced, their faces twin masks of disbelief. When a nurse finally let us back, the sight of Chloe stole the air from my lungs. She was swallowed by the sterile white bed, her skin a pale, translucent gray. The vibrant, incandescent woman from the party was gone, replaced by this fragile, exhausted stranger. What happens when the brightest light in your life begins to dim? The next few days were a blur of tests, hushed conversations in hallways, and the relentless beeping of machines. We existed on stale coffee and fear. We were suspended in a state of unknowing, a place far worse than bad news. Finally, a doctor, a man with tired eyes and a kind face, led the four of us into a small, windowless conference room. He sat down, folded his hands on the table, and the quiet gravity in the room told me everything I needed to know. My life was about to be split into two distinct periods, before this room and after. Chloe has been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, he said. The words didn't sound real. They were clinical, sterile, a string of syllables that had no place in the same sentence as my sister's name. Leukemia. It was a word from sad movies and charity fundraisers, not from our lives. My father started asking questions, his voice shaking, trying to pin down the amorphous horror with logic and facts. My mother simply stared, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She had gone somewhere else, somewhere deep inside herself where the words couldn't reach her. I felt Dan's hand on my back, a steady pressure meant to ground me, but I was floating away. Acute, aggressive. The doctor's words were precise, clean cuts severing us from the world we knew. He let the weight of the diagnosis settle before he delivered the final, devastating blow. The chemotherapy will be aggressive, but it will only buy us time. He paused, his gaze meeting mine. Her only real chance for a cure is a bone marrow transplant. And we need to find a donor. Urgently. Have you ever felt an entire universe of hope and terror shrink down to the size of a single drop of blood? That's what it felt like in the lab. The four of us, my parents, Dan and I, sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs that stuck to the backs of our legs. We were there to be tested, to see if any of us held the key to Chloe's life inside our veins. The process was insultingly simple. A nurse with bored eyes called our names, swabbed our arms with alcohol, and drew our blood. It was a mundane, bureaucratic procedure for a miracle. My parents went first, their faces tight with a prayerful desperation. They were trying to be brave, but I could see the tremor in my mother's hand as she signed the consent form. When it was my turn, I didn't watch the needle go in. I stared at a crack in the ceiling tile and thought about being 8 years old, promising Chloe I'd fight the monster under her bed. This monster was different. It was microscopic, insidious, and I had no idea how to fight it. All I could do was offer up a piece of myself and pray it was the right piece. The waiting was a new form of torture. For 3 days, every time my phone rang, my heart tried to hammer its way out of my chest. Life felt thin, a fragile film stretched over a chasm of fear. At school, I'd find myself staring into the middle distance, the sounds of my students fading into a dull roar. How could I teach them about life cycles when my own sister's was being so violently interrupted? The call about my parents came on a Thursday afternoon. It was my dad. "Neither of us are a match, Maya," he said, and his voice broke, shattered by the weight of his own biology failing his child. Suddenly, every bit of that crushing family hope swiveled and focused on me, a single, blinding spotlight. I was the last shot, the final lottery ticket. That night, Dan held me as I cried, not for myself, but for the possibility that I would fail them all. What if I'm not a match, Dan? What if I'm no good to her? He just held me tighter, his own fear a silent, solid presence in the dark. "You're her sister," he whispered, as if that simple fact could rewrite genetic code. "It has to be you." The pressure was immense, the love and terror of an entire family resting on the unseen arrangement of my cells. The call from the hospital came the next morning. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker, when my phone vibrated on the counter. It was Dr. Adams, the hematologist. I answered, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Maya," he said, his voice steady and professional. "We have your results." I held my breath, bracing for the impact. You are a perfect match. 10 out of 10 markers. We couldn't have asked for a better outcome. What is the sound of a world snapping back into place? It's the sound of your own ragged exhale. I hung up the phone and a strangled sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaped my lips. 10 out of 10. A perfect match. In a world that had become brutally random and cruel, those words felt like a divine intervention, a sign that we had not been abandoned. I called my parents, and my mother's weeping was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "It's a miracle, Maya," she cried, her voice thick with gratitude and tears. A miracle. I knew it. I knew God wouldn't take both my girls. That afternoon, I went to the hospital. I walked into Chloe's room, and the sight of her, so pale against the pillows, solidified every ounce of resolve in my body. She looked at me, her eyes large and weary. I took her hand. It felt as fragile as a bird's wing. "They told me," she whispered, a flicker of her old light returning to her eyes. "You're a perfect match." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I didn't need to. In that moment, there was no choice to make. It was like asking a heart if it should beat. You don't decide to save your sister. You just do. The fear was there, a cold stone in the pit of my stomach, but it didn't matter. I would walk through fire for her. I had no idea I was about to be asked to. The sense of purpose, of being the chosen one, the perfect 10 out of 10 savior, lasted for exactly 72 hours. It carried me through the phone calls, the tearful gratitude from my parents, and the quiet, fierce pride in Dan's eyes. It was a shield, this feeling of righteousness. I was going to save my sister. The fear was still there, but now it had a noble purpose. It was the fear a soldier feels before a battle they know they will win. I had no idea I was marching toward the wrong war. The meeting was with Dr. Adams, the hematologist. His office was a study in beige, a room designed to be utterly forgettable. Do you know the secret to making a terrifying procedure sound routine? You discuss it in a room with no sharp edges, under lighting that hums with quiet indifference. Dr. Adams was calm, his voice a low, steady monotone as he explained the process. He spoke of efficiency and modern medicine. It wasn't the brutal, invasive surgery I had imagined from old movies. "We'll be doing a peripheral blood stem cell donation," he explained, pointing to a diagram that made the human body look like a simple plumbing schematic. "It's much easier on the donor. For 5 days leading up to the donation, you'll receive daily injections of a drug called filgrastim. This stimulates your bone marrow to overproduce stem cells and release them into your bloodstream." He made it sound like I was just revving an engine. I nodded, absorbing the information like a diligent student. 5 days of shots. I could do that. "You may experience some side effects from the injections," he continued, his eyes on his notes. "Bone pain, particularly in your hips and sternum, fatigue, headaches, flu-like symptoms essentially. It's your body working overtime. It's a sign the medication is doing its job." Aches and pains. A few days of feeling like I had the flu. Was that all? It felt like an insultingly small price to pay for Chloe's life. I was ready for so much more. I would have gladly offered a limb. A few days of discomfort felt like a bargain. He then described the collection itself. I would be hooked up to a machine, an apheresis device, that would draw blood from one arm, filter out the precious life-giving stem cells, and return the rest of my blood to my other arm. It would take a few hours. I could watch a movie or read a book. Simple, efficient, modern. I felt a wave of relief. This was something I could handle. A clear and manageable path. What if I told you that the most dangerous threats are never the ones you prepare for? Dr. Adams closed the folder on his desk, the sound of cardboard on laminate echoing in the quiet room. He gave me a thin, professional smile. The meeting was over. But then, as he was pushing his chair back, he paused. There is one other thing. I'm obligated to inform you of all potential risks, no matter how rare. He said it casually, an afterthought, the way a waiter might mention that the soup of the day contains nuts. It was this casualness that made the words that followed so devastating. In a very small percentage of female donors, we're talking maybe 1%, if that, the stimulating drugs can have an adverse effect on the ovaries. He adjusted his glasses, and for the first time, he looked directly at me, his gaze clinical and unreadable. It can trigger something called premature ovarian failure. Essentially, it could push your body into early menopause. He stopped, letting the words hang in the sterile air between us. And just like that, the beige, forgettable room became the coldest, most terrifying place on earth. My mind snagged on the last two words: early menopause. I heard them, but my brain refused to assemble their meaning. A ringing started in my ears, high and thin, drowning out the hum of the lights. What? What does that mean? I asked, and my voice sounded alien, a faint whisper from a great distance. Dr. Adams's face remained placid. It means it could lead to permanent infertility. Infertility. The word didn't just land in the room, it detonated. It blew away the hope from Dr. Evans's office. It vaporized the image of Dan's hand on my stomach. It incinerated the future I had been so carefully, so desperately, trying to build. My dream wasn't just at risk, it was the price tag on my sister's life. I drove home with a 1% chance of infertility sitting in the passenger seat. It had a weight, a presence. It buckled itself in and stared out the window at the blurry, indifferent world. How do you quantify a risk like that? It sounds so small, so insignificant. 1%. 99% of the time, everything is fine. But what's the difference between a 1% risk and a 99% risk when it's your 1%? It becomes the only number that matters. The world becomes a binary equation. You are either the one or you are not. The house was quiet when I got home, filled with the late afternoon sun that always made the dust motes dance in the air. Dan was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a rhythmic, steady beat that was the soundtrack of our life. He looked up when I came in, and his face broke into that easy smile that had been my safe harbor for 6 years. "Hey you, how'd it go? You feel ready to be a hero?" His question was so light, so full of innocent pride that it felt like a physical blow. I had walked out of that beige office a hero in training. I walked into my home a potential traitor to my own future. I couldn't speak. I just stood there in the entryway, the doctor's words: premature ovarian failure, early menopause, permanent infertility, ricocheting around the inside of my skull. Dan's smile faltered, the knife still in his hand. "May, what is it? What's wrong?" I watched him wipe his hands on a dish towel and walk toward me, his brow furrowed with concern. In his eyes, I saw our shared dream, the empty room upstairs we'd painted a soft, hopeful yellow. How do you tell the man you love that the key to that room might have to be thrown into a fire to save someone else? I finally found my voice, but it was a reedy, thin thing. "There's a risk, a side effect from the drugs they have to give me." I walked past him and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands flat on the cool wood as if to steady myself. He followed, pulling up a chair so our knees were almost touching. He waited, his patience a testament to his love. I made myself look at him, at the man who measured my fevers and held my hand during every negative pregnancy test. He said there's a small chance, a 1% chance, that the medication could make me infertile, Dan. Permanently. I watched the words hit him. It wasn't a slow dawning, it was a physical impact. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin pale and taut over his cheekbones. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. For the first time since we'd met, his easy confidence, his fundamental belief that things would always work out, was just gone. "No," he finally whispered, shaking his head slowly. "No, they can't ask you to do that." It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. It was the first brick in a wall that was suddenly rising between us. "It's the only way to get the stem cells, Dan. It's the procedure." I tried to keep my voice even, tried to present it as a fact, a piece of unfortunate but necessary information. But he was already shaking his head more forcefully, his eyes wide with a horror that was directed not at Chloe's illness, but at this new threat. "Then you can't do it. It's that simple. Maya, you cannot risk it." His words were sharp, absolute. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting us. He was protecting the ghost of our unborn child. And in that moment, our shared dream became his, and my duty to my sister became mine alone. The argument that followed was quiet, brutal, and tore a hole in the fabric of our marriage. I had never seen him look at me with such desperation, such raw fear. "This is our family we're talking about, our dream, the one we've been fighting for over a year," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't lose that. I can't lose you to that." But I heard what he wasn't saying. It wasn't me he was afraid of losing. It was the idea of me as a mother. "And I can't lose my sister, Dan. She will die. That's not a risk. It's a certainty." Our two fundamental desires, his for a future family and mine for a present one, had just been declared at war. Later that evening, after a dinner of cold silence, I called my parents. I felt sick with dread. A lonely soldier reporting from a battlefront my own husband wouldn't join. I put the phone on speaker, my mother's anxious "hello?" filling the room. I explained the risk as clinically as I could, stripping it of the emotional chaos it had unleashed in my own home. I told them about the 1%, about premature ovarian failure. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then my father's voice, tight with forced optimism, came through. 1%? Maya, that's nothing. Doctors have to tell you the worst-case scenario for everything. It's just a legal thing. I had never been so surrounded by family, and I had never felt so completely alone. There are conversations that are not conversations at all, but ambushes laid with love. My parents called the next day and said they were coming over. Their tone was bright, manufactured. They wanted to talk things through properly. I knew then that the denial phase was over. This was the offensive. They arrived with a pot roast, as if this were a normal Sunday dinner, a bizarre offering of peace before a declaration of war. They sat on our sofa, two people I loved more than anything, their faces etched with a desperate, terrifying resolve. My father began, leaning forward with his hands clasped between his knees, adopting the reasonable tone he used for business negotiations. "Maya, honey, we've been thinking about this. 1% is a lottery number. You're more likely to get struck by lightning. We can't let a statistical ghost derail the only chance Chloe has. 99 times out of 100, you walk away with a few aches and a healthy sister. Those are incredible odds." He was trying to frame it as a gamble. But what he didn't understand is that you don't gamble with the only thing you've ever truly wanted. I shook my head, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea I had no intention of drinking. "It's not a number to me, Dad. It's a door. And if it closes, it never opens again. This isn't just my risk. It's mine and Dan's." The mention of Dan's name hung in the air, a shield they hadn't anticipated. My mother flinched, her soft face hardening. The mask of gentle concern was beginning to slip, revealing the raw panic of a mother about to lose her child. She saw my dream not as a precious, fragile thing, but as an obstacle, A selfish, inconvenient roadblock. "This is about Chloe's life," my mother said, her voice low and trembling with an intensity that scared me. It was the voice of a primal animal fear. "Her life, Maya. She's 26. She hasn't even started yet. Her whole future, that career she worked so hard for, finding someone to love, having her own family one day. It all just vanishes." She was painting a picture of Chloe's stolen potential, a vibrant, detailed masterpiece, and holding it right next to my quiet 32-year-old life. And then she picked up a knife and slashed my canvas to ribbons. She looked right at me, her eyes pleading but also accusing, and delivered the blow. "Maya, please, just think. Chloe has her entire life ahead of her, a career. She hasn't even really loved properly yet. But you have Dan. You have this house. You have your life." She took a breath, and the words that came next were quiet, precise, and monstrous. "You've already lived." And there it was. The most honest and most cruel thing she had ever said to me. Have you ever been told to your face that your life is complete? That its value has already been spent? The world tilted. The sound in the room rushed out, replaced by a dull, roaring silence. My life wasn't a journey anymore. It was a destination that I had apparently already reached. I was a completed chapter in a book that was mostly about my sister. My desires, my hopes for a child, the future I yearned for. They were all just post-credit scenes. Luxuries, non-essential. All the love and support I had felt from them my entire life suddenly felt conditional, transactional. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was a utility, a walking, breathing bag of life-saving cells that was inconveniently attached to a woman with her own selfish dreams. My father said nothing. His silence was a co-signature on my mother's monstrous statement. They saw me, their firstborn, the one who taught Chloe how to ride a bike and held her hand on the first day of school, and they had weighed my life's dream against Chloe's potential. And my dream was found wanting. They weren't asking me to risk my future anymore. They were telling me it was a price worth paying because its value had depreciated. They left soon after, the pot roast sitting on the counter. A greasy monument to our family's complete and utter implosion. I didn't move from my chair for a very long time, trapped in the wreckage of what my mother had just said. How do you fight for a future that your own family has already declared over? Do you know that guilt has a physical weight? It's not a metaphor. It's a dense, heavy presence that settles in your sternum, making each breath a conscious effort. It was my companion as I walked down the bleached, sterile corridor of the oncology ward. Each squeak of my shoes against the linoleum a fresh accusation. The secret I was keeping, the 1% risk that had become a 100% obsession, was a stone in my gut. I had to face Chloe, and I had to lie to her. I had to look into the eyes of the person I was being asked to sacrifice for and pretend I was a willing savior. The room smelled of antiseptic and something vaguely metallic, the signature scent of the chemotherapy that was waging war inside her body. She was asleep when I entered, and the sight of her was a fresh wave of shock. The change in just a few days was terrifying. Her face, once so full and alive, was gaunt and pale, the skin stretched thin over her cheekbones. Her dark, glossy hair was dull and had started to thin, a few stray strands clinging to the white pillowcase. An IV stand stood guard by her bed, its clear tubes feeding life and poison into her veins in equal measure. This was not Chloe. This was the shell she inhabited now. I sat down quietly in the visitor's chair, the vinyl cool against my legs. After a few minutes, her eyelids fluttered open. She turned her head slowly, and for a second, there was a flicker of confusion in her eyes before they focused on me. A weak, fragile smile touched her lips. Maya, she whispered, her voice raspy, a ghost of its former strength. You came. I forced a smile that felt like a cheap, cracking mask. Of course I came. How are you feeling? It was a stupid question. The answer was written on every inch of her. How could anyone look at this and ask how she was feeling? Like I've been run over by a truck, she said, her smile wavering. But the doctors say the chemo is working. They say the blast cells are decreasing. She spoke with a kind of desperate hope, clinging to medical terms like they were life rafts. I keep thinking about work. I wonder if they've given my desk away yet. She was trying to be brave, to be the old Chloe, the unstoppable force. But it was a performance, and we both knew it. Her gaze drifted to me, her eyes large and dark in her pale face. Mom and Dad told me they're really happy about you being a match. My heart seized. The lie was there, sitting on my tongue, heavy and foul. Here it was, the moment to reassure her, to play the part of the selfless hero. Before I could answer, her carefully constructed bravery shattered. Her lower lip began to tremble, and a tear escaped, tracing a path down her hollowed cheek. I'm so scared, Maya, she whispered, the sound raw and terrified, the sound of a 26-year-old staring at the abyss. She reached a hand toward me, her fingers thin and trembling. I don't want to die. I took her hand, its coldness a shock. Her skin was like paper. She held on with what little strength she had, her eyes locked on mine, searching for the certainty she had lost. And then she delivered the final devastating blow, a question born of pure, innocent terror that was more manipulative than any of my mother's cruel calculations. You're going to save me, right? You're my big sister. You always save me. My mother's words echoed in my head. You've already lived, colliding with my sister's desperate plea. I want to live. What could I do? What could anyone do? I looked into the terrified eyes of my little sister, the girl whose nightmares I used to chase away, and I lied. I nodded, a jerky, unnatural movement. Of course, Chloe, I managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Of course I will. The relief that washed over her face was a physical thing, a light that momentarily pushed back the shadows. And every ounce of that relief transferred itself to me as guilt, a crushing, suffocating weight that was pinning me in that chair, in that moment, in that impossible choice. Have you ever been judged by a jury of your own family? Not for something you've done, but for something you haven't done yet. Time officially ran out on a Wednesday morning. The call came from Dr. Adams, and his voice was devoid of all its previous clinical calm. It was sharp, urgent. Maya, Chloe's numbers have taken a significant downturn. Her body isn't responding to this last round of chemo as we'd hoped. We can't wait any longer. The window for the transplant is closing. It's now or never. Now or never. 2 words that vaporized all the gray area in the world, leaving only a brutal, binary choice. Before I had even processed the doctor's words, my phone rang again. It was my father. His voice was different, stripped of the false optimism from our last conversation. It was cold steel. We're at the house, your mother and I, your Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark. We need you to come over. Now. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The drive to my childhood home, a place of 1,000 warm memories, felt like a drive to my own sentencing. Every red light was a moment of borrowed time, a brief stay of execution. Dan had wanted to come, but I told him no. I knew, instinctively, that this was something I had to face alone. They would see him as an enemy, an outside influence. I was the one they needed to break. The atmosphere in the living room was thick enough to choke on. My aunt and uncle, people who had bounced me on their knees and snuck me cookies as a child, sat stiffly on the floral sofa. Their faces were grim, unfamiliar masks of solemnity. My parents sat in their matching armchairs, a king and queen presiding over a grim court. No one offered me a drink. No one asked how I was. I was the defendant, and they had all gathered to deliver the verdict. My father gestured to the empty chair opposite them, the hot seat, the dock. I sat, the silence pressing in on me, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall counting down the seconds of my autonomy. My father began, his voice devoid of any warmth, a CEO delivering bad news to the board. Dr. Adams called us. He explained the situation. Chloe is running out of time. Her body is shutting down, Maya. The doctors have been clear. The transplant has to happen within the next few days, or there will be nothing left to transplant into. He laid the facts out like weapons, each one designed to dismantle my hesitation. He was building a case not for saving Chloe, but against my right to even consider myself in the equation. My 1% risk was a frivolous luxury in the face of her impending death. My mother's voice cut in, sharp and frayed. She was past the point of quiet manipulation. This was raw, open-wound desperation. How can you do this? How can you drag this out? Every day you spend thinking, she gets weaker. She is lying in that hospital bed, fighting for her life, while you are here, safe in your house, weighing your options. She made my fear, my dream, sound like a selfish indulgence, a petty calculation in the face of real tragedy. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, leaned forward, her face a mask of pained sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. Honey, we know this is hard, but sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love. That's what a family is. This was it. The final push. The moment they moved from persuasion to coercion. I looked from face to face, searching for an ally, for a flicker of understanding, but I found none. They were a wall, a united front of love that had been weaponized against me. I was no longer a person to them. I was a procedure. I was the cure, and my reluctance was a disease they were determined to eradicate. My father stood up, a towering figure of paternal authority, his face set like stone. He looked down at me, and I was 8 years old again, caught drawing on the walls. This is no longer a discussion, Maya. This is not a choice you get to weigh and measure, he said, his voice low and dangerous. This is your duty. It is your duty as a daughter and as a sister. She is your blood. The word duty landed like a punch to the gut. It stripped away all love, all compassion, all choice, and left only a cold, hard obligation. He was telling me that my body, my future, was not my own. It belonged to the family, an asset to be deployed as they saw fit. They were no longer asking for a sacrifice. They were demanding a surrender. And then he delivered the final fatal blow, the words that were designed to haunt me for the rest of my life, a curse that would follow me to my grave. He looked me straight in the eye, his own filled not with anger, but with a chilling, absolute certainty. So I am telling you now, you will do this. Because if you refuse, if you walk away and anything happens to Chloe, we will never, ever forgive you. The threat was absolute. It was not just the loss of my sister he was holding over my head. It was the loss of my entire family. It was the promise of a lifetime of exile, of being the one who let her sister die. The choice was a lie. There was no choice. There was only obedience, or utter, complete damnation. I left my parents' house not in a rage, but in a strange, chilling calm. The ultimatum hadn't broken me. It had incinerated the part of me that was willing to be a victim. Have you ever been pushed so far that the fear just burns away, leaving behind something hard and clear? The tears, the pleading, the agonizing indecision. It all felt like it belonged to a different person. My father's threat, meant to cage me, had instead handed me a key. They had shown me their hand, They saw this as a zero-sum game, Chloe's life for my fertility, and I refused to play. Dan was waiting for me, his face a mess of anxiety. He saw my expression and the questions died on his lips. "They cornered you," he stated, his voice flat with a fury he was holding in check for my sake. I nodded. "They gave me an ultimatum. Do it, or be disowned. Be the sister who let her die." I walked past him into my study, the small room where I graded papers and planned lessons. It was my space, a place of order and solutions. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a strange sense of purpose humming through me. "What are you doing?" Dan asked, standing in the doorway, watching me as if I might shatter. "I'm a teacher, Dan," I said, the words coming out with a clarity that surprised me. When a problem seems impossible, you don't give up. You look at it from a different angle. You find another way. They had presented me with two doors. One led to my sister's death, the other to the death of my dream. What if they were wrong? What if there was a third door they didn't know about, or didn't want to see? That night, I didn't sleep. Fueled by coffee and a cold, clear rage, I dove into a world I knew nothing about. I waded through dense medical journals, clinical trial results, and patient forums from the last 2 decades. I typed in search terms like a woman possessed, bone marrow donation alternatives, non-hormonal stem cell harvest, fertility risks in donation. My classroom skills kicked in. I wasn't just a desperate sister anymore. I was a researcher, hunting for a single piece of data that could change everything. I was looking for a loophole in reality itself. Most of what I found confirmed Dr. Adams's preference for the filgrastim injections and peripheral blood stem cell (PBSC) collection. It was newer, often yielded more cells, and was generally considered less invasive for the donor. But the word less hung there. Less than what? And then, around 3 in the morning, buried in a footnote of a paper from the early 2000s, I found it. A description of the older method. The one that the PBSC harvest had largely replaced. It was called a bone marrow harvest, BMH. And as I read, my heart began to beat faster. The procedure was exactly what I'd pictured in my head before this nightmare began. It involved no hormonal stimulation, no filgrastim, no risk of premature ovarian failure. Instead, the donor is put under general anesthesia, and the marrow, the thick, rich source of the stem cells, is drawn directly from the back of the pelvic bone with special needles. The description was blunt. It was more invasive, more painful during recovery. Donors reported significant soreness and bruising for a week or more. But one line screamed at me from the screen. This procedure carries no known long-term risks to the donor's reproductive system. There it was, the third door. It wasn't an easy door. It was heavier, more painful. It meant choosing to go through a more physically grueling process. It meant anesthesia and a recovery that would be far worse than a few days of flu-like symptoms. But it was a door that allowed me to save my sister without sacrificing myself. It wasn't a choice between Chloe and my future child. It was a choice between my comfort and their existence. And that was a choice I could make. That was a choice I could live with. A wave of something fierce and powerful washed over me. It was the exhilarating rush of finding a solution. I hadn't just accepted their ultimatum. I had found a way to defy its very premise. They had tried to trap me in a cage with only 2 exits, but I had just found the tools to build my own. I printed out the articles, my hands shaking slightly, not with fear, but with adrenaline. I highlighted the key passages, my yellow marker a weapon against their certainty. I was no longer a victim of their impossible choice. I was a woman with a counteroffer, and I was ready to fight. There's a unique kind of power that comes from doing your homework. It's the feeling of walking into a test knowing you have the answers. Armed with my folder of highlighted medical articles, I felt that power. Dan was beside me, a silent, solid wall of support. We sat in the same beige office where my world had been detonated just days before. This time, I wasn't there to receive information. I was there to provide it. Dr. Adams listened, his face a mask of professional patience, as I laid out my discovery of the bone marrow harvest. I explained the procedure, quoting the passages I'd memorized. I spoke about the lack of hormonal stimulants, the absence of risk to my fertility. I finished and pushed the folder across his desk. It's more invasive for me, I know that. It's a more difficult recovery, but it's a viable, established procedure that gets the stem cells to my sister without forcing me to gamble with my future. I want to do this one. I had expected a debate, perhaps a flicker of admiration for my diligence. What I got was a condescending smile. Maya, I appreciate the research you've done, he began, his tone the one a teacher uses for a bright but misguided student. And yes, a direct marrow harvest is, of course, a procedure that exists. We used to do it all the time, but the standard of care has evolved. A stimulated PBSC donation is more modern, more efficient. The yields are typically far more robust, giving the recipient a better reserve of cells for engraftment. We do it this way because, for the patient, it's often the superior option. What do you do when the system designed to help you sees your solution as a problem? He wasn't hearing me. He was hearing a nervous donor trying to deviate from his carefully planned protocol. He saw my well-researched proposal not as a solution, but as an administrative hassle. I was no longer the perfect 10 out of 10 savior. I was a complication. But the risk, I insisted, my voice rising slightly. This other way has no risk. He waved a dismissive hand. The risk is, as I said, minimal. In medicine, we are always weighing minimal risks against optimal outcomes. The optimal outcome for Chloe is the highest possible cell count. He was drawing a line in the sand. My 1% was an acceptable loss for his optimal outcome. The second presentation was to my family. We met in the hospital cafeteria, a brightly lit room that felt anything but cheerful. I laid out the same logic, the same articles, on a table sticky with spilled soda. I explained the two procedures, emphasizing that both would save Chloe, but only one would save my future. When I finished, I was met with a wall of stony silence. My father picked up one of the articles, squinting at the dense medical text as if it were written in a foreign language. He didn't understand the science, only the headlines he'd constructed in his own terrified mind. So let me get this straight, he said, his voice dripping with a corrosive disappointment. You went and found a different procedure, an older one, that's more painful and harder on you, just to avoid this 1 in 100 chance the doctor told you about? The way he framed it made me sound insane, selfish. He was twisting my proactive solution into an act of self-preservation at Chloe's expense. That's not it at all, I retorted, my frustration boiling over. It's not about avoiding pain, Dad. I'm choosing more pain. It's about avoiding a permanent, life-altering consequence. My mother's face was pale, her eyes filled with a desperate, accusatory light. The doctor said his way is better for Chloe, Maya. More robust, he said. Why would you even consider giving her the second best option? What if the cell count from this other way isn't enough? What if it doesn't work as well? They had latched onto the doctor's words, modern, efficient, robust, and translated them into a simple, brutal equation. The first way was the good way, and my way was the bad way. They didn't see two paths to the same goal. They saw a safe highway for Chloe and a dangerous side road I was selfishly trying to take. I looked at their faces, at the fear that had curdled into judgment, and I realized the devastating truth. My enemy wasn't just my family's emotional ultimatum anymore. It was bigger. It was the quiet, unyielding resistance of the system itself. It was a doctor's professional preference, and my parents' terrified ignorance, all twisted together into a barrier of institutional and emotional concrete. They saw my fight for my own body not as an act of strength, but as a betrayal. I wasn't just fighting for my future now, I was fighting against their perception of my love. What is the loudest sound in the world? It isn't an explosion. It's a whispered argument in a hospital corridor that you were never meant to hear. The impasse with Dr. Adams and my parents had reached a stalemate. They were all waiting for me to crack, to give in to the emotional blackmail and the weight of medical authority. I had gone to the hospital to see Chloe, but my parents intercepted me just outside her room, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and fury. Their voices were low, urgent, a venomous whisper campaign against my resolve. "He said her white count is dangerously low, Maya," my mother hissed, her hand gripping my arm. "This is not the time for your selfish experiments. You are playing with her life." My father stood beside her, his arms crossed. "Dr. Adams is the expert. You read a few articles on the internet and you think you know better than him? This is absurd. You are putting your vanity ahead of your sister's survival." Every word was a tiny, poisoned dart. I tried to argue, to re-explain the logic, but it was like reasoning with a tidal wave of fear. We were so caught up in our bitter, quiet war that none of us noticed Chloe's door was cracked open. The call came late that night. The house was dark and silent. Dan asleep beside me, his breathing a steady rhythm in a world that had lost all of its own. The phone's glow on the nightstand was jarring, a digital intruder in the gloom. It was the hospital's number. My first thought was the worst one, but when I answered, the voice on the other end was not a doctor's. It was a faint, reedy whisper that was almost lost in the static. "Maya?" It was Chloe. My heart stopped. Was this it? The moment where she begged me, adding her voice to the chorus? "Chloe, what is it? Are you okay?" I whispered, swinging my legs out of bed and walking into the hallway. "I'm okay," she said, her voice thin but strangely clear, imbued with a calm that terrified me. "I heard you, arguing with Mom and Dad in the hall. I heard what you were trying to tell them." I sank down onto the floor, the cold wood a shock against my skin. The secret was out. "Chloe, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to defend myself to her. But I didn't have to." What she said next wasn't an accusation. It was an act of grace so profound it completely rewired my soul. "Don't do it, Maya," she whispered, and I could hear the effort in her voice, the fight for every word. "Please, don't risk your future for me." I could hear her take a ragged breath. "I want you to be a mom. I want to be an aunt. I want to spoil your kids and teach them how to get away with everything." A sob caught in my throat, hot and painful. This was not the voice of a victim pleading for her life. This was the voice of my sister, my fierce, brilliant sister fighting for mine. This was the purest love I had ever known, a love willing to face death to protect a dream. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. The argument was over. My parents were wrong. Dr. Adams was wrong. They were all trying to solve the wrong problem. They were trying to choose between Chloe's life and my future. But Chloe had just given me the real solution. I had to save both. Her selfless act wasn't permission to let her go. It was a mandate to fight even harder. To honor her love, I had to save her life and become a mother. I hung up the phone, a new kind of fire burning in my veins. The next morning, I didn't call my parents. I called a lawyer who specialized in patient advocacy and medical rights. The time for asking was over. It was time to demand. A lawyer's phone call is a strange way to win a battle for your own body. There was no fanfare, no moment of triumph. Just a clipped, professional voice on the other end of the line. The hospital's legal department has reviewed your request, Maya. The chief of staff has approved the bone marrow harvest procedure. They'll be in touch to schedule it. I hung up, but I felt no rush of victory, only the profound, bone-deep weariness of the fight. I had won, but I'd had to threaten, to weaponize my rights, just to be heard. I had forced them to let me save my sister my way. The morning of the procedure, the world seemed muted, wrapped in a gray pre-dawn fog. In the pre-op room, I was stripped of my identity and handed a flimsy, backless gown. I was no longer Maya, the teacher, the wife, the sister. I was a patient, a collection of veins and bones to be harvested. Dan sat beside me, his hand a warm, constant pressure on mine. He didn't speak much, but his presence was a language all its own. It said, "I see you. I am here. You are not alone in this." He had been my anchor through the entire storm, the one person who never saw my choice as a betrayal. My parents arrived a few minutes later, hovering in the doorway as if uncertain of their right to enter. Have you ever seen someone try to fold themselves into a smaller space? That was my father. He, who had commanded my life with such certainty, couldn't meet my eyes. He studied his shoes, the scuff on the linoleum floor, the informational poster on the wall about hand washing. My mother was worse. She clutched her purse like a shield, her face a ravaged landscape of sleepless nights. The arrogance of their ultimatum was gone, replaced by the hollowed-out shame of people forced to watch a consequence of their own making unfold. A nurse, brisk and efficient, bustled in with a clipboard. "Time to go, Maya." This was it. The moment of separation. Dan leaned down and kissed me, his lips warm against my cool skin. "I love you," he whispered, his voice thick. "I'll be right here when you wake up." I held his gaze for a second longer than I should have, memorizing it. Then I looked at my parents. My mother finally met my eyes, and hers were swimming with tears. "We're sorry," she whispered, the words so small I almost didn't hear them. It wasn't an absolution, but it was something. As they wheeled me out, the last thing I saw was the three of them through the window in the door, a tableau of fear, relief, and a shame so profound it was almost a physical presence. The journey to the operating room is a strange, lonely pilgrimage. You lie on your back and watch the world glide past in reverse. Fluorescent lights strobed overhead, one after another, a hypnotic, sterile rhythm. The sounds of the hospital, a distant page, the squeak of cartwheels, the low hum of machinery, faded into a single, monotonous drone. I was utterly alone with my choice. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a strange sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, there were no more arguments, no more ultimatums, no more impossible choices to be made. There was only this gurney, this path, this decision. The operating room was colder than the rest of the hospital, a shock of frigid air that smelled of iodine and steel. Masked figures moved with quiet purpose around me, their voices low and professional. They were a team, a well-oiled machine, and I was the material they were about to work on. The anesthesiologist, a kind-faced woman with expressive eyes, leaned over me. "Okay, Maya, I'm giving you the medication now. You'll feel a little warmth in your arm, then you'll be asleep. Just count backwards from 100 for me." I felt the cool liquid enter my vein, a slow, creeping warmth that began to blur the sharp edges of the room. 100, 99. I thought of Chloe, of her whispered plea in the dark, her love strong enough to let me go. I thought of the ghost of a child, the one I had fought so hard not to lose. This pain I had chosen, the deep ache that would bloom in my bones when I woke up, was a currency. I was trading my own physical comfort for two futures. 98. The masked faces began to swim, the beeping of the monitor growing distant. My final conscious thought was not one of fear or sacrifice, but of balance. I was saving my sister, and I was saving myself. It was the only path, the most painful path, and the only one that led to life. What is the half-life of a family crisis? Does it ever fully decay, or does it just radiate at a lower, more manageable frequency for a lifetime? It's been 2 years since I woke up in a hospital bed with a deep, aching pain in my bones that felt like a victory. 2 years. The world kept turning, and slowly, painstakingly, my world righted itself, settling on a new, more honest axis. The quiet in my house today is different from the strained silence of those dark weeks. This is a peace that was fought for, paid for, and earned. The yellow nursery, once a room of desperate, aching hope, is now filled with the scent of baby powder and warm milk. I sit in the rocking chair, a soft light filtering through the afternoon window, and watch my daughter sleep in my arms. Her name is Amelia. She is 3 months old, and she is a miracle forged not by chance, but by choice. I study the impossibly tiny curl of her fingers, the gentle flutter of her eyelids, and I understand that the fight was never just about me, it was about her. She was the ghost I was protecting, the future I refused to sacrifice. Chloe is here. She let herself in, a habit we've thankfully reclaimed, and now leans against the doorframe, a vision of health and restless energy in a sharp navy suit. She's a junior partner at her firm, a promotion she got a full year ahead of schedule. She looks at me, then at the sleeping bundle in my arms, and the fierce ambition in her eyes softens into something else, something deeper. "Still think she looks more like Dan?" she whispers, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "Definitely," I whisper back. She got his calm. She got my stubbornness. Chloe laughs, a real, full-throated laugh that I once feared I would never hear again. It's the most beautiful sound in the world. Our parents visit on Sundays. It is a fragile, carefully choreographed ritual. They don't barge in with unsolicited advice and assumptions anymore. They call first. They knock. They wait to be invited in. The old, easy entitlement is gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful respect. My father, the man who delivered the crushing ultimatum, is now a clumsy, utterly besotted grandfather. He holds Amelia with a reverence that borders on terror, his big hands looking comically large as he supports her tiny head. He doesn't talk about what happened. He doesn't have to. His apology is in the way he asks permission to pick her up, in the way he looks at me when he thinks I'm not watching. My mother is a different story. The shame settled deeper in her. She moves through our house with a quiet deference, a ghost in her own daughter's life. She'll watch me change a diaper and say, "You're so good with her, Maya." There's a question mark at the end of it, a plea for reassurance that she hasn't irreparably broken the thing between us. I give it to her. We will never speak of the day she told me I had already lived, but the memory of it is the foundation of our new relationship, a relationship built on the hard-won knowledge that my life and its potential is my own. Later, after Chloe has left for a late meeting and the house is quiet again, I lay Amelia in her crib. She makes a tiny, contented sigh, her little chest rising and falling in a steady, perfect rhythm. I stand there, one hand on the railing, and just watch her breathe. I think of the two paths that lay before me, the impossible choice designed to tear a family apart. They wanted me to choose between a sister and a daughter. But Chloe's love, her whispered plea in the dark, showed me the way. The choice was never between them. It was between surrendering and fighting. I looked down at this tiny, perfect life, a life that exists only because I refuse to let a dream die. I had to fight my own family, the medical system, and the crushing weight of my own guilt to bring her into this world. My mother told me I had already lived, that my chapter was complete. But she was wrong. My life didn't truly begin until I found the courage to fight for it, to demand its value. Sometimes, in order to give life, you have to first stand your ground and furiously, unapologetically, protect your own.